Emily Monroe was 6 years old, dying of cancer, and the only person who could save her wasn't on her emergency contact list. Amara Williams had raised her since birth, loved her like blood, but when she offered her liver to save Emily's life, the hospital said no. "You're not family," they told the black woman, who held Emily's hand through every chemo scream. So that night, Amara disappeared with the child, a forged letter, and one chance to save her. But what she did next made her a national headline, or a criminal. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Watch till the end, then rate this story out of 10. Share in the comments below. Your feedback help us bring you even better stories every single day. The sky over Manhattan hung heavy, slate gray, and still, as if the city itself had paused to listen. In the towering penthouse of Richard Monroe, a billionaire whose name had once stirred headlines, IPOs, and tech revolutions, the silence was oppressive. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the suffocating stillness that comes when you've run out of miracles. Richard stood before a wall of glass, looking down at the grid of the city. His tailored suit jacket hung loose over his frame, his shirt still tucked but wrinkled at the edges. In his hand, a phone that had long stopped ringing. He had spoken to 6 hospitals, 12 specialists, 3 continents. He could have bought any building in sight, but the one thing he couldn't buy was more time. Behind him, on a beige suede couch, lay Emily, 6 years old, half black, half white, his only child. The only reason he remembered what life meant after Julia died giving birth. Her tiny body was draped in a soft lavender blanket, her eyelids fluttering beneath the weight of the morphine. The diagnosis had come 3 months ago. Hepatoblastoma. Rare. Aggressive. Deadly. They'd tried chemotherapy. It ravaged her. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her gums bled. They tried targeted therapy, then immunotherapy. For 1 week, there was hope. Then her liver numbers spiked again. Metastasis. Her lungs. Her spine. Her bones. The final blow came that morning. "She has maybe 3 months," Dr. Halverson had said, eyes cast downward. "I'm sorry." Sorry. The man was sorry. Richard had built satellites that could track hurricanes in real time. He'd written code that made him billions. But not one of his algorithms could slow a child's cancer. Not one of his patents could stop a 6-year-old's bones from aching every time she breathed. He walked to the side of the couch and knelt down beside her. Emily's skin, once cinnamon gold and radiant, was pale with a tinge of green. Her lips, dry. But when she opened her eyes, soft and brown like her mother's, she smiled. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Are we still gonna do my party?" He blinked, swallowed. "Of course, sweetheart. Of course we are." She nodded gently, eyes closing again. "I want a real cake this time, like in the cartoons." Behind her, half sitting in the armchair, Amara Williams watched quietly. In her late 30s, with skin like dark bronze and eyes carved by loss and resolve, she had been with the Monroes since Emily's birth. First as a live-in nanny, then as everything else Julia had left behind. Emily called her Mommy Number 2. No one taught her that. No one told her to. It had just happened. Amara had raised the child through teething, tantrums, and ballet rehearsals. She knew every scar on Emily's knees, every lullaby that calmed her fevers. And now, she watched helplessly as the child she loved like blood slowly drifted toward death. The doctors had asked her to step out of the room during the last meeting. Immediate family only, they said. Richard hadn't corrected them. He hadn't noticed. Amara did. She always noticed. Downstairs, the elevator doors opened, and a courier entered with yet another box of supplements, biohacks, and experimental concoctions. Richard's assistant signed without question. Everything was overnighted, triple sealed, custom synthesized in labs Richard had invested in. None of it worked. Money was no longer power. It was desperation. Richard hadn't slept in 2 nights. He spent hours every night researching obscure medical journals, calling researchers at universities, trying to fund trials that didn't exist yet. There was one therapy in Finland, another in Singapore. Both were inaccessible under Emily's current condition. The cancer had progressed too far. Her organs wouldn't withstand the travel. He hadn't cried in 20 years. Not at his wedding. Not even when Julia died. But he cried that night. He cried, alone in the kitchen, face buried in his hands, where the only person who heard him was Amara standing silently behind the pantry wall. The next day, Emily woke up coughing blood. They rushed her to Horizon Children's. It was the 5th time in 2 weeks. Amara held her hand in the back of the ambulance, whispering the same prayer she once spoke over her own baby sister's grave when she was 10 years old. A sister who died from a curable condition in a hospital that had dismissed their pain as exaggeration. Black girls are strong, they'd said. She'll bounce back. She didn't. Now here was Emily. Small, fragile, biracial. Her father white, her nanny black. And the system still treated her like she was invisible. That evening, in the hospital room, Richard paced while Emily slept. Machines beeped and hissed in rhythms he no longer noticed. Amara sat beside the bed, her hand gently brushing through Emily's stubbled scalp. She wants a party, Richard said flatly. A real one. Amara looked up. We'll do it. Here? In this room? We'll make it beautiful. He shook his head, frustrated. It's not enough. Nothing is. I can't fix this. Amara didn't reply right away. Then she said, she doesn't need you to fix it. She needs you to believe she's going to live. He stared at her. And if I don't? Then, at least pretend. There was silence between them. It wasn't the silence of enemies. It was the silence of two people standing on opposite sides of the same cliff, both trying to catch the same falling child. That weekend, the party happened. Hospital staff helped string fairy lights across the IV poles. Balloons floated beside the monitors. A small crown sat crooked on Emily's bald head. Amara had sewn her a dress from old tulle curtains, hand-dyed in pink. She looked like a princess from a broken kingdom. She smiled, laughed even, ate 2 spoonfuls of cake, and then fell asleep in Amara's arms. After everyone left, with the lights dimmed and machines still pulsing, Emily stirred. Mommy number 2? She whispered. Amara leaned down. Yes, baby? Am I going to live? Her voice cracked mid-sentence. A 6-year-old, asking a question no child should ever have to ask. Amara didn't speak for a moment. She just held her tighter. Finally, she said, we're not done fighting yet, baby girl. Across the room, Richard sat frozen. The words echoed in his ears like thunder. We're not done fighting yet. He hadn't said them. He didn't believe them. But Amara did. And for the first time in weeks, something shifted in the air, not hope, but defiance. As Richard prepared to begin his slow goodbye, someone else in the room had already decided the fight wasn't over. And before the week was out, Amara would do something that would change all their lives forever. The hospital corridor smelled like sterilized grief. Bleach, plastic, latex gloves, each note a reminder that hope was manufactured here in limited supply. Outside room 314, nurses passed quietly with clipboards, barely glancing through the glass. Inside, time had slowed. Amara Williams sat by Emily's hospital bed, her back straight despite the fatigue gnawing at her spine. The room was dim now. A small lamp cast a warm glow on Emily's face, and the soft lull of the heart monitor played like a broken lullaby. The crown from the party had slipped down her forehead, resting crooked above her brow. She looked more like a warrior than a princess battle-worn, but smiling. Amara gently adjusted the crown, then leaned closer. You were the most beautiful thing in that room today, she whispered. Emily didn't open her eyes. She only muttered, even prettier than Nurse Maria? Amara chuckled, soft and aching. Especially prettier than Nurse Maria. Then came the silence. The kind Amara feared. The long pause between breaths. She leaned in to listen, then felt the soft rise of Emily's chest. Still here. Still fighting. She had raised this child since the day Julia Monroe bled out in that delivery suite, while Richard collapsed to the floor, broken and useless. Amara had stepped forward. Diapers, feedings, midnight rocking, the first steps, the first nightmares. There had never been a line between them in Emily's eyes. But in the world's eyes, that line was bold, permanent. Amara was the nanny, just the help. She had heard it in the way the nurses asked for Richard before discussing Emily's care. She had felt it when hospital security once questioned her ID when she returned from the cafeteria with soup. She had tasted it in the pause, the stiffness, when new doctors walked in and saw a black woman sitting at the child's bedside, cradling her hand like it was sacred. Are you part of the family? One had asked 2 weeks ago, clipboard already turning away. Amara didn't answer. Not because she didn't have one, but because she knew it wouldn't matter. The morning after the party, Emily's fever spiked again. Her oxygen dipped. Doctors rushed in, the room flooded with wires and murmurs. Amara was pushed aside. Literally. A young resident moved between her and the bed, clipboard snapping. Ma'am, we need space. Ma'am. They didn't know her name after all these months. Never asked. Richard hadn't arrived yet. His meetings were back-to-back, with biotech partners in Silicon Valley. He hadn't wanted to go, but Amara had said, if there's even a chance something comes from it, go. She hadn't told him about the cough blood, the tremors, the dark blue beneath Emily's nails. There was nothing more to say that wouldn't kill him faster than the cancer. When the chaos settled and the team left the room, Emily's eyes fluttered open again. She reached weakly for Amara's hand. Mommy number 2? She rasped. I'm here, baby, Amara said, crouching again beside her. Are you still fighting? Tears welled up in Amara's eyes, but she held them back. She nodded. I'll never stop. Emily squeezed her fingers faintly, then fell asleep again. Amara stayed by the bedside, unmoving. Later that evening, a nurse, young, red-haired, with a chirpy tone and clipped politeness, entered with new medication. She paused when she saw Amara sitting there. Oh, sorry. I thought only immediate family were staying overnight, the nurse said, frowning. Amara looked up. I'm with her. Well, Mr. Monroe didn't mention a secondary guardian, the nurse replied, scanning the chart. Amara didn't blink. She calls me Mommy number 2. I've been raising her since birth. The nurse smiled, that tight-lipped smile that wasn't really a smile. I understand, but for her medical record, I need to list your relation. Amara stood, calmly. Her voice didn't raise, but it hardened. Put down that I'm the one who's here. Every day. Every night. When her pain gets bad. When she's scared. Put down that I'm the one she calls for in her sleep. The nurse hesitated, then tapped her tablet and moved on, murmuring, I'll just leave it blank. Amara sat back down. Her hands trembled. Not from anger, but from the quiet humiliation that came when a system refused to acknowledge your love, your labor, your sacrifice. She wasn't asking for a title. She was asking for truth. Hours later, Richard returned. His face drawn, tie loosened. His assistant trailed behind him with a stack of papers and test results from a clinic in Germany. They have something, he said breathlessly. An experimental enzyme therapy costs millions, but they need a liver that hasn't been compromised by chemo. Amara turned slowly. You mean a transplant? Yes, but a partial one. Emily's too small for a full liver. They need a donor, a match, hope. Cold and sharp, like glass in her lungs. Her only living relative is you, Amara said. Richard nodded grimly. And I'm not a match. He looked at her. Neither of them said it aloud, but in that moment, Amara felt something crack wide open inside her. That night, she went to the nurse's station. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for Richard. She simply said, I want to be tested as a liver donor. The nurse blinked. Are you a blood relative? No. Legal guardian? No. Then you're not eligible. I want to be tested anyway. The nurse gave a mechanical smile. You don't qualify under current hospital policy. Amara clenched her fists. She had stayed quiet for too long. Now the rules were trying to write her out of Emily's story completely. I'm not asking, she said. I'm telling you. If this were your child, would you wait for a form? The nurse hesitated. Amara's voice dropped. Then test me. Back in room 314, Emily stirred again in her sleep. Amara returned, kissed her forehead, and sat in silence. The lights hummed softly. The machines pulsed in rhythm. She thought of her sister, 8 years old. Sickle cell. A rural clinic that didn't believe black. Girls felt pain the same way. A misdiagnosis. A funeral with a Barbie doll in the casket. Amara hadn't been able to save her then. She would not fail again. She didn't care what the hospital thought of her. She didn't care if they called her the help. She would bleed, cut, and offer up any part of herself to keep Emily alive. The next morning, she was tested in secret. Blood work, imaging, tissue compatibility, and then something no one expected. She was a match. A perfect match. Despite no shared blood, no biological link, her liver was compatible. 1 in 10 million odds. A miracle, buried in silence. Amara stared at the results in disbelief. She waited outside the hospital chapel that evening, holding the manila envelope. Richard came down the hall, shoulders sagging, tie off. She handed him the test results without speaking. He read them. His mouth opened slightly. This can't be right. It is. You're a match? She nodded. You'd really do this? I already decided. But the risk, I'm not afraid. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in weeks, as if trying to see what he'd always overlooked. but fear rose in his eyes. If I lose you too. Amara's face didn't soften. This isn't your choice. But you could die. And if I don't do this, she will. They stood in silence. Richard turned, pacing. I can't ask you to do this. You didn't ask. He looked at her eyes raw, pleading, but there was no reversing what had already begun in Amara's heart. This was her daughter, whether the world recognized it or not. And nothing, not paperwork, not policy, not prejudice, was going to stop her from saving Emily. What she planned to do next would defy every hospital rule, every legal boundary, and leave Richard blindsided in ways he never imagined. The envelope trembled in Amara's hands long after Richard walked away, even after his footsteps faded down the sterile hallway, even after the echoes of the conversation died in the air. She sat alone in the chapel corridor, clutching the proof. She was a perfect match, not partial, not borderline, perfect. The nurse who handed her the results had blinked twice, confused. Wait, you're not biologically related? No, Amara said, her voice low. I'm not. The nurse had stared, then hesitated before saying, This doesn't make sense. I've never seen this happen. But it had. It happened because, somehow, this little girl who had been hers in every way but name, was tethered to her in a way science couldn't quantify. A match not by blood, but by bond. A liver born in the body of a black woman with no legal ties, no medical recognition, no authority to even sign off on an aspirin, yet still the only body that could save her. Amara folded the envelope neatly and slid it into her coat pocket like a secret. But the truth wasn't what scared her. It was knowing the system wouldn't care. She returned to room 314. Emily was sleeping again, small and still beneath the sheets. The machines blinked in steady rhythm. Richard wasn't there. A note sat on the table. Meeting with Stanford trial coordinator. We'll be back in the morning. Amara exhaled. That gave her time. She sat beside Emily, brushing her hands softly. Mommy number 2. Emily murmured, eyes closed, lips dry. I'm here, baby. I dreamed you were flying. Amara's hand froze. Flying. You had wings. And you carried me away from this place. Amara leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, We're getting out, baby. You and me. I promise. The next morning, Amara returned to the donor office to start the formal approval process. The coordinator, a white woman in her 50s with a perma-smile and clipped tone, flipped through the results with tight brows. This is highly unusual, the woman said. Are you aware of the hospital's policies? Amara nodded. Then you understand, this won't be approved. I understand you've got a child upstairs, with 3 months left, and a match sitting in your office. The coordinator didn't flinch. We're bound by legal guardianship rules. Unless you're blood, spouse, or court-appointed, we can't move forward. Why? It's designed to prevent coercion, illegal trafficking, exploitation. Amara laughed under her breath. Exploitation? You think someone's forcing me to do this? We have to protect both parties. I'm not both parties. I'm the one offering to die. The woman sat back in her chair. I'm sorry, Miss Williams. The answer is no. Back in the hallway, Amara leaned against the wall, breathing slowly. Nurses passed by without noticing. A janitor pushed his mop cart through without a glance. People moved around her like she didn't exist. She was back in the same place she'd been as a child. Watching her baby sister, Michaela, seize in a clinic hallway while staff debated whether it was an actual emergency. Back then, her mother had screamed for help. No one came. The official report had called it delayed diagnosis. Amara called it something else. Neglect shaped like policy. Now it was happening again. Only this time, she had a way to fight back. That evening, Richard returned with new papers in hand. More trials, more options, more signatures needed. His optimism was wild-eyed, frantic. He paced in the corner while Emily dozed, spouting drug names like spells. Richard, Amara interrupted. He stopped, looked at her. They're not going to approve it. He blinked. What? The transplant. The hospital won't let me do it. He looked stunned. But you're a match. I'm not a relative. Not a guardian. Not even on the emergency contact list. His face fell. Then I'll get a lawyer. I'll push the board. You don't have time. Neither does she. He rubbed his face with both hands. It's too dangerous anyway. You could die. I'm not afraid of that. Well, I am, he snapped, louder than he meant to. Then quieter. You're the only one holding this family together. Amara stepped closer. Then let me do what you can't. He hesitated. Then, he said the thing that would stay with her for years. You're not her mother. Silence. He didn't mean it the way it landed, but it landed like a blade. Not her mother? Not the woman who stayed up through Emily's seizures, who wiped her tears, who sat through every PTA meeting, who read her goodnight moon in 3 languages. Not the woman who would give her body to keep her alive? Richard realized the mistake too late. Amara didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just walked out of the room and didn't look back. That night, in the hospital cafeteria, she sat with the envelope again, the matching test. Her miracle, invalidated by bureaucracy and a careless man's words. She could see it all clearly now. There was only one way left. Not through the hospital, not through policies. She needed someone who would look at her match, not her title. Someone who had nothing left to lose, like her. She thought about an old friend, Dr. Salim Hamza, a surgeon she'd met 10 years ago volunteering during Hurricane Katrina recovery efforts. He had lost his daughter to liver failure in the US. Too many delays, too many insurance calls, too much red tape. After that, he left the country, moved to Casablanca, started doing transplants others wouldn't touch. She still had his number. She pulled out her phone and dialed. He answered on the 3rd ring. Amara? His voice, groggy with sleep. Morocco was hours ahead. She explained everything. Silence on the other end. Then, send me your scans. Tonight. Later, back in the hospital room, she sat beside Emily again. Richard wasn't there. He'd gone to the rooftop to make more calls. Emily stirred, her breathing shallow. Amara whispered, "You're going to live, baby. Even if I have to carry you across oceans." Emily didn't answer, but she smiled. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew. By midnight, Salim had reviewed the scans. The match was confirmed. He sent one message, "Come, I'll do it." But quietly, no delays. At 2 a.m., Amara stood alone in the hospital chapel. She prayed. Not for herself. Not for safety. Just for time. She knew what she had to do. It was dangerous, illegal, uninsured, risky. But waiting was more dangerous. And dying while knowing she could have done something? That would be worse than death. The next morning, she booked 2 plane tickets. Casablanca. The surgery was scheduled. The clock had started ticking. What she didn't know was that someone had overheard her call and had already made their own. Rain tapped against the hospital chapel's stained glass windows like impatient fingers. Amara stood motionless beneath the dim glow of the sanctuary's single lamp, the plane ticket still warm in her coat pocket. Emily's breathing had worsened overnight. The nurses kept their voices low, and Richard, still clinging to the illusion that another breakthrough trial would come through, barely spoke. But Amara had made her decision. She was leaving with Emily. She was going to save her. And she wasn't going to ask permission anymore. Dr. Salim Hamza's reply had been short, clear, absolute. "Come. No red tape. I'll make the space. But you must hurry." Salim didn't offer sympathy. He never had the luxury of it. Years ago, in a bustling New Jersey hospital, he'd watched his own 8-year-old daughter fade away, liver failure strangling the light from her small brown eyes. The donor match had arrived too late, not because one hadn't existed, but because protocol required 3 more ethics meetings, and her mother's undocumented status had stalled paperwork. No child. Should have been tied to. Salim had buried his daughter next to a tree she once climbed barefoot. Then he left America for good. He set up in Casablanca, under the protection of a semi-legal humanitarian hospital built for those the world forgot. Refugees. Stateless children. Desperate parents with no passports, no voices, and no time. Amara was exactly the kind of person he'd been waiting to help. Inside the hospital, the air was thick with things unsaid. Richard's calls to Germany had hit a dead end. The new treatment required organ stability. Emily's organs were failing. He was unraveling. He didn't know Amara had already booked the flight. Didn't know she'd used a fake name. Didn't know that while he scanned spreadsheets of trial data, she was packing a tiny backpack with Emily's essentials. 1 worn stuffed rabbit, a framed photo of Julia, 2 of Emily's favorite storybooks, and the letter. The letter said, "If I don't wake up, tell her." Mommy said yes. Salim texted again. "We need the blood panels 2 days prior, and a clean scan of the left hepatic lobe. Send before takeoff." Amara moved through the hospital's maze of rules like a ghost. The lab tech at the night shift didn't ask why she was running her own panel again. She smiled, offered a calm story, and slipped him $300 in cash. He didn't argue. But that night, a quiet tremor of doubt found her. She stood in the pediatric unit's washroom, staring at her reflection. Her eyes were lined with sleeplessness, her cheeks sunken. She touched her side where the scalpel would cut, where life would be carved from her to save another's. She whispered into the mirror, "I'm not afraid." It was true. She wasn't afraid to die, but she was terrified of failing. Emily stirred awake around 3 a.m. Amara leaned close, brushing back the child's damp hair. "You okay, baby?" she whispered. Emily gave a faint smile. "You're still here. Always." Emily reached for her hand, small and trembling. "When Mommy died, I didn't know what to do. But then you came. I don't remember much, but I remember that." Amara blinked back a tear. "You saved me before," Emily whispered. "You can do it again." Amara didn't reply. She simply held her tighter. By sunrise, the test results came in. Everything aligned. Salim confirmed the surgical team was ready. The hospital wing had been cleared. The beds were prepped. They had 48 hours to get there. And Emily's vitals were declining fast. The plan was delicate. Amara would wait for Richard to leave for his next consultation. She would tell the hospital she was taking Emily for a personal day, a request sometimes allowed for end-of-life palliative patients. A driver she trusted, Andre, would meet them at the back exit. From there, a private sedan to JFK. 2 seats booked under false names. She would carry a notarized letter from a family friend, posing as Emily's godmother, claiming travel approval for emergency international wellness care. Everything was forged, everything was risky, but everything was ready. She gave herself one moment, just one, to look at Emily while she slept. That small face, that tiny chin, the same face she'd kissed through fevers, birthdays, scraped knees, and lullabies. Then she looked out the window at the skyline, fading into the early light. America hadn't seen her. Not in the courtroom when her sister died, not in the school systems that dismissed her, not in the hospital that refused her. But Emily saw her, and that was enough. Just after noon, Richard walked in with a new specialist on speakerphone. Amara stood up quickly, shielding the bag in the corner. "Just spoke to Zurich," Richard said. "There's a new compound, early data only, but they're willing to send samples." Amara nodded politely. "That's good." He looked at her. "You seem calm." She forced a soft smile. "I believe she's going to make it." He stared at her, eyes unsure. "Because of Zurich?" She didn't answer. He sighed, then muttered, "I need to make a call," and stepped back out. The door clicked. Amara turned to Emily. "It's time." Andre's car was waiting behind the service elevator. The hallway was empty. The nurse on duty had gone to lunch. Amara gently lifted Emily, careful of her IV port, tucking the child into a thick coat. Emily stirred but didn't wake. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cold. Each step felt heavier than the last. She carried Emily like a mother carries her whole life, softly, urgently, reverently. They made it to the back exit. The door creaked. Andre stepped out. "You sure about this?" "Drive." They slid into the back seat. The airport was 43 minutes away. 20 minutes into the drive, Amara's phone vibrated. A message from Salim. "New problem. Moroccan customs asking for hospital records. Without them, they may hold you. Send ANY document proving emergency." She froze. She had one record, Emily's diagnosis sheet, but it was still at the hospital. She panicked. Then, slowly, she reached into her purse. The letter. "If I don't wake up, tell her Mommy said yes." She snapped a photo, typed one line. "This is all I've got. Hit send." Salim replied instantly. "It's enough. Just make it to me. We'll handle the rest here." As the car neared the airport, Amara looked down at Emily's pale face. The child was barely awake, mumbling nonsense, drifting. Amara gripped her hand. "We're almost there. You just hold on. You hear me?" Emily didn't answer. Amara leaned in. "Baby girl? Emily?" Emily's head slumped slightly toward her shoulder. Amara's breath caught. The car hit a red light. Seconds stretched. Then Emily coughed. A weak, wet cough, but a sound. Alive. Still here. Amara looked up at the glowing airport lights. They had minutes, maybe less. But inside the terminal, a man in a black coat was already waiting with orders to stop them before they reached the gate. The first missed call came at 4:37 a.m. Richard Monroe didn't notice it. He was mid-presentation at a biotech investor retreat in Zurich, surrounded by sterile white walls, projection screens, and a half-circle of men in dark suits who valued innovation over people. The second call came at 4:49 a.m., this time from Horizon Children's Medical Center. The third came at 5:12 a.m. He stepped out of the meeting, annoyed more than concerned. Emily's nurse had his assistant's number. Why were they calling him directly? But when he answered, the chill in the administrator's voice dropped the floor from under his feet. "Mr. Monroe, I'm sorry to inform you. Emily's no longer here." "What do you mean no longer here?" "She's been discharged." "No one discharges her but me. She was signed out by someone close to the family, a woman named Amara Williams." Silence. His ears began to ring. The phone slipped a little in his grip. He had to ask twice before his voice worked. "When?" "Approximately 90 minutes ago. We assumed it was authorized. I apologize, we followed palliative care protocol." But Richard wasn't listening anymore. He'd made a mistake. He'd left. He'd let his desperation chase miracles, while the only one who actually had the courage to act had already taken Emily from the hospital. The jet took off in less than an hour. Richard didn't bother to rebook his seat. He climbed into the cockpit with the pilot like a man racing time. Every second felt like a betrayal. His brain flicked through 1,000 scenarios, none of them made sense. Amara would never hurt Emily. She wasn't irrational, but she was brave, braver than he'd ever been. And bravery, when mixed with grief, was combustible. He landed at Teterboro Airport under a gray sky, and was met not by his driver, but by Horizon's head of security. "Sir, this was found in Emily's hospital room," the man said, handing him a sealed envelope. Richard recognized Amara's handwriting instantly. His hand trembled as he opened it. The letter was short. "If I don't wake up, tell her." Mommy said yes. He sat back against the seat of the car like he'd been hit. It wasn't a ransom. It wasn't an abduction. It was a goodbye. No worse. It was a declaration of war against time, against red tape, against him. Back at the penthouse, he paced like a man unraveling. Emily's room was untouched. Her stuffed animals still sat neatly on her bed, her pink headphones on the windowsill, her medication chart still pinned above her lamp. He stared at the emptiness, and something hollow grew inside him. He thought of the last thing he'd said to Amara. "You're not her mother." He hadn't meant it, not really. But now, the words echoed like a curse. She'd taken his daughter. She'd left him behind. And yet, somewhere deep in his chest, he knew. She hadn't taken Emily from him. She'd taken her toward life. Thousands of miles away, under the heavy Moroccan sun, Amara stepped out of the taxi, her arms shaking from the strain of holding Emily upright. The girl was barely conscious. Her eyes rolled. Her body was drenched in sweat. The hospital didn't look like the sterile marvels of Manhattan. The entrance was chipped stone, shaded by bougainvillea vines. But inside, it was a fortress of second chances. Patients without papers, mothers with children wrapped in cotton blankets, people who the world had given up on until they got here. Dr. Salim met her at the gate, eyes burning with focus. "We're out of time," he said. "I know." He scooped Emily into his arms like she was his own and ran through the doors. Pre-op was a blur. Fluids. Anesthesiologists. A translator reading waivers. A final blood draw. Then came the moment. They laid Amara on the table, beside Emily, separated by a sterile curtain. "Are you ready?" a nurse asked. Amara nodded. "She's my reason," she whispered. The surgical lights came on. She closed her eyes. Back in New York, Richard sat at his kitchen counter, staring at the letter again. His lawyer's voice crackled over speakerphone. "You want to file an international abduction report?" He didn't respond. "Richard, if something goes wrong, she's saving her," he interrupted quietly. The lawyer paused. "So, you're not pressing charges?" He clicked the phone off, then called the one person he never expected to call. Julia's sister, Danielle. Danielle picked up after the third ring, her voice dry with suspicion. "You haven't called me in years. I need to find Emily." "I know, I saw the news. It's everywhere." "What news?" "She's trending. Some security camera photo at JFK got out. Twitter's already calling her the nanny savior. You should see the hashtags." Richard closed his eyes. "What are people saying?" "They're calling you the villain." He exhaled. "Good," he muttered. "They're not wrong." Danielle's voice softened. "What did Amara do?" "She did what I couldn't. In Morocco, the surgery began. It was high risk, uninsured, done under outdated machines, but steady hands. Dr. Salim removed a portion of Amara's liver, first checking and rechecking the viability. Then, He began Emily's procedure. The child's vitals dropped twice. Code blue was nearly called. But she clung. Both patients were stabilized after 6 hours. Still unconscious. Still uncertain. But still alive. Salim stood at the window afterward, soaked in sweat, scrubs clinging to him. He didn't cry. He never did. But for one brief moment, he placed his hand on the glass between him and Emily, and whispered, "Not this time." Back in the U.S., Richard sat on the floor of Emily's bedroom. The room smelled faintly of her. He picked up her favorite storybook and opened to the inside cover. It was signed, "To my baby girl. From Mommy Number 2. A tear slipped down his cheek. Then another. At 3:07 a.m. Eastern Time, Richard's phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. Moroccan code. He answered, a deep voice. She made it. Both of them are alive. For now. Richard swallowed hard. Can I speak to her? They're both unconscious. But I'll tell her you called. And in a small room in Casablanca, Amara's finger twitched. A tiny movement. A pulse of life. Emily lay beside her, IV lines gently pulsing. The monitors beeped in a delicate duet. For now, they had made it. But dawn hadn't come yet. And the hardest hours were still ahead. One would wake up first, but neither knew if the other would ever open their eyes again. The first thing Richard noticed when he entered the recovery ward in Casablanca wasn't the machines or the faint antiseptic smell. It was how small they looked. Amara and Emily, side by side, in separate beds, under sterile white sheets connected by tubes and monitors that hummed in eerie synchrony. Two fragile bodies, suspended between breath and silence. Two lives dangling in the aftermath of a miracle no one had authorized. He didn't speak when he entered. His voice had collapsed somewhere over the Atlantic. The flight from New York had been a blur. He'd barely slept. The letter, "If I don't wake up, tell her," Mommy said. Yes, stayed folded in his pocket like a confession he wasn't ready to read again. He'd expected chaos, border trouble, diplomatic red tape, but Dr. Salim had connections. Quiet power. Richard had been escorted straight to the private ICU with a nod and a single sentence. She did it. Now, all he could do was stare. Amara's skin was gray. Not the rich bronze he knew, but dull, drained. Her lips chapped. A breathing tube nestled between them. Emily, a shade lighter, looked almost ghostly in contrast. Her face, still puffy from steroids. Her eyelids purple. Her chest rose in tiny, uneven movements. Two monitors beeped rhythmically. Richard followed each spike with his eyes. One dip, then another, then recovery. He didn't know which screen belonged to whom. Didn't care. He pulled a chair between the beds and sat, his hands trembling. I couldn't save her, he whispered, staring at Emily. Not with labs, not with money, not with power. He turned to Amara. But you did. And now I might lose you instead. Doctor. Salim entered quietly an hour later, his voice low. She's stable, but in a coma. Why? Richard asked. The liver resection was successful. No internal bleeding. But her vitals dipped midway. We think she coded briefly, maybe 15 seconds. Enough to cause hypoxia. We won't know how deep the damage is until she wakes. If she wakes, Richard said, almost to himself. Salim nodded solemnly. She risked everything. I told her it wasn't safe. She didn't care. She said, my life started when I held her for the first time. If it ends saving her, that's okay. Richard looked down. She's braver than anyone I've ever met. Salim hesitated, then added, your daughter's numbers are changing. Slowly. Richard looked up. She's responding? The cancer markers dropped. Liver enzymes stabilizing. The new liver's working. Better than we hoped. So, she might live? Salim offered a rare, small smile. She has a real chance. Richard felt a sob rise to his throat but crushed it down. There was no room for hope yet. Not until one of them opened their eyes. The nurses rotated quietly in the room. A new IV drip here. A vitals check there. Richard didn't move. He slept upright in the chair between them, one hand resting on each bed. Hours bled into a day into another. He watched the sun rise and fall through the frosted windows. No movement, no words, just breath. He prayed to no God in particular. Not for himself. Not even for Emily. For Amara. On the third night, the tension broke. At 3:11 a.m., Emily stirred, just a twitch at first. A slight movement of her left hand. Richard shot up. Emily? The monitor beeped faster. Her eyes fluttered, then opened. Slow. Groggy. but open. Richard's heart cracked. Baby, it's me. Daddy's here. She blinked. Her lips parted. He leaned closer. What do you need, sweetheart? She turned her head, barely able to move. Her voice, dry and raspy, came out in a whisper. Where's mommy number 2? Richard froze. Not daddy. Not, what happened? Her first words, barely audible, were a question, a cry, a demand. Richard blinked fast. She's right here, baby. She's resting. Just like you were. Emily's gaze shifted toward the next bed. The tears came fast now. Not from Emily, from him. Emily tried to sit up, winced, then fell back. She's okay? She whispered. We're waiting, he said. She's strong, baby girl. She just needs more time. Emily blinked slowly, then said something Richard would never forget. She gave me her magic. That night, nurses celebrated quietly in the hallway. Not loudly, not joyfully. They understood the delicacy of such miracles. Salim entered an update into the records. Post-transplant patient conscious. Stable vitals. Hepatic response strong. One battle had turned. But beside her, Amara lay still. Her brain scans were inconclusive. Some swelling, slight hypoxia. But no one could predict what the days ahead held. Richard remained beside her, alone now. Emily sleeping again. He took the letter from his pocket, smoothed it out. He read it slowly. If I don't wake up, tell her, Mommy said yes. There was more on the back. A single line scrawled hastily in pen. Tell Richard, I forgave him a long time ago. His chest caved. He hadn't known she was still holding on to what he'd said. He hadn't known she forgave him. Outside, a photographer waited across the street. He wasn't local. He worked for an international news agency. He had a telephoto lens. He had the tip-off. Billionaire's nanny in coma after smuggling child for illegal surgery. He snapped 3 photos through the cracked hospital window, then sent them to the newsroom with a single headline. Savior or kidnapper? The world was about to find out. And when they did, Amara's face would be plastered across headlines before she ever woke up to defend herself. The hospital lights flickered just before dawn. The air conditioning kicked in with a low groan, circulating the scent of antiseptic and blooming jasmine from the courtyard below. In room 205, Emily Monroe was alive. It still felt impossible. Her charts told the story first: her white blood cell count stabilizing, liver enzymes leveling, her vitals climbing like a slow sunrise. But it wasn't until her cheeks regained that subtle rosy hue, the one she'd had before cancer hollowed her out, that the nurses started to whisper the word recovery. It was delicate, conditional, wrapped in disclaimers, but no one could deny it. She was getting better. By the 5th day, she was sitting up on her own. Can I have cake? She asked, her voice scratchy but firm. The question made Richard smile for the first time in what felt like months. What kind? He asked. Chocolate. With pink flowers. Real ones? No, she said, rolling her eyes. Frosting ones. Richard turned to the nurse nearby. Whatever it takes. Get her a cake. The nurse smiled, but there was something behind it. A pause. A glance at Amara's bed. Richard didn't miss it, because while Emily asked for cake, she also asked the same question every morning, always right after she woke up, and always in a whisper. Where's mommy number 2? Sometimes Richard pretended not to hear. Sometimes he just said, she's resting. But every time he answered, he could see it in Emily's eyes, the disappointment, the ache, the fear that maybe rest was just a nicer word for gone. Doctors from 4 countries contacted Salim's team for updates. The transplant had been high risk and technically unsanctioned, but the results were miraculous. Medical journals sent inquiries. NGOs offered funding. A medical ethics board in Geneva requested the full case file. But Amara remained in the coma. Still. Silent. The woman who risked everything didn't get to watch the miracle unfold. Richard stayed in the hospital. He refused every press call, declined every interview request. A BBC crew flew in and camped outside for a week before giving up. All Richard cared about was the child in the bed and the woman in the one beside her. He spent his days between them, reading to Emily, talking to Amara. He didn't know if Amara could hear him, but he talked anyway. I wish I could go back, he said one night, voice low and hoarse. I wish I'd seen you the way she always did. He paused. I said something unforgivable. He folded the letter she'd written and slid it under her hand. I don't expect you to forgive me again. I just want you to wake up. Emily kept getting stronger. She started laughing again, softly, gently, but real. She even began brushing her doll's hair, demanding that a nurse tie it just like mommy number 2 does. The doll had no hair. Neither did Emily yet. It didn't matter. Hope was blooming again. But Amara didn't move. 10 days post-surgery, the cake finally arrived. A local bakery, arranged by Richard, delivered a round chocolate cake with thick pink frosting roses and a small gold plaque that read, "You did it, Emily." She clapped when she saw it, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with glee. "Can she have a slice?" Richard asked the doctor. "She's earned it," Salim replied. Emily took one bite and smiled. Then she looked at the bed beside hers. "Can she have one too?" Richard froze. "She loves chocolate." "I know," he said gently. "She promised we'd eat cake when I got better." Richard's throat closed. "She will," he said. "She will." That night, Richard sat at Amara's bedside and whispered stories. He told her how Emily asked for her every day, how she insisted the nurses use the blue blanket Amara used to tuck her in with, how she refused to sleep unless the curtain between their beds was pulled back so she could see her. "You didn't just save her body," he said. "You saved the part of her that still believed in joy." He took Amara's hand in his. "Come back to her." The next morning, it happened. At 6:44 a.m., a nurse entered to check vitals. She was midway through updating Emily's chart when a whisper, quiet, broken, dry, rose from the next bed. "Where am I?" The nurse dropped her pen. Richard, asleep in the chair, bolted upright. He turned. Amara's eyes were half open, unfocused. The breathing tube had been removed days ago, but her throat was raw. "Amara," he whispered. Her eyes tracked the room, confused. Her gaze didn't settle. Richard leaned closer. "It's okay. You're safe." She blinked slowly, trying to speak, but her lips barely moved. "You're in Casablanca," he said gently. "The surgery went well. Emily's okay." She tried to lift her head, failed. Richard reached for the call button. Emily, half asleep, stirred at the noise. Then her eyes opened fully. She saw Amara. Saw her eyes. "Mommy number 2," she cried out. Amara's gaze shot toward the voice. Recognition hit her like a wave. Her lips parted. She tried to speak, but before she could say anything, the door burst open. 2 unfamiliar men stood there. Suits. Tense expressions. American accents. One held a folder. The other wore a Department of State badge clipped to his belt. "Amara Williams?" one said sharply. Richard stepped between them and the bed. "What the hell is this?" "We're here on behalf of the U.S. consulate," the man said. "We have questions regarding an unauthorized international transport of a minor. We need to speak with Miss Williams immediately." Richard's face hardened. "She just came out of a coma. You're not speaking with her today." The second man pulled a paper from his folder. "This is a subpoena." Emily clutched her doll tighter. "Daddy?" she whispered. Richard turned to her, voice firm but calm. "It's okay, baby." But his eyes were already burning. Amara blinked, dazed. She didn't understand what was happening. Not yet. But as her vision cleared, she saw the badge and realized she had woken up in a world that was ready to punish her for saving a life. The photo hit social media before Amara's IV drip even finished its cycle. A grainy hospital window shot 2 beds, one tiny figure sitting upright, the other lying still, tubes coiled like vines. The caption was simple. "Black nanny gives part of her liver to billionaire's daughter. Unlawful. Unthinkable. Unforgettable." Within hours, it was everywhere. TikTok clips dissected the ethics. Twitter exploded with hashtags, "Mommy number 2, "Let her go", "Liver of love." Morning shows debated the legality. Evening pundits debated the morality. And by nightfall, Amara Williams had become the world's most controversial miracle. But she didn't know it yet. She was still trying to stay awake. "Can someone tell me what's happening?" she croaked, her throat still parched from days in a coma. Richard pulled the blanket up around her. "The world found out." Amara frowned. "Found out what?" "Found out what?" "About the transplant. About what you did." "I didn't do it for the world." "I know," he said. "But they don't care. They made you their headline." He handed her a phone. On the screen, a photo of her face, eyes closed, with the words, "Is love illegal?" She stared at it, unreadable, then turned the phone off. "What are they saying?" she asked. Richard hesitated. "Some are calling you a hero. And the others?" He swallowed. "A criminal." By the time the U.S. consular officials returned that afternoon, the entire hospital was barricaded with press. Cameras craned over stone walls. Drones buzzed the airspace. Staff wore surgical masks indoors to avoid being recognized. Every hallway echoed with whispers. An emergency ethics committee at Horizon Children's convened within 24 hours of the news leak. Not to discuss Emily's survival, but to discuss whether Amara had violated international medical law by acting without consent. A CNN anchor led the segment. Love or recklessness? Was this a mother's sacrifice or a breach of protocol? A guest commentator, a white bioethics attorney from D.C., answered without flinching. She isn't family. She isn't authorized. This was a rogue act. One that endangered a child. Love doesn't excuse that. Richard slammed the remote down. I should have stopped this, he muttered. I should have protected you. You tried, Amara said quietly. But protection in your world is different. He looked at her, startled. In your world, she continued, protection means lawyers, press statements, and handshakes behind closed doors. In mine, it means jumping in front of the bullet. He nodded slowly. You did that, he whispered. She gave a faint, weary smile. Then let me have some peace while I recover. But peace was not coming. By the third day post-coma, the Moroccan government had issued a public statement defending the hospital's decision to perform the surgery under emergency humanitarian grounds. But they also confirmed that U.S. officials had requested a full investigation into Amara's actions. The pressure wasn't coming from Morocco. It was coming from America. From the same system that had refused her. From the same boardrooms and hospital networks that had denied the transplant because of paperwork, not compatibility. From the same people now trying to rewrite the narrative so they wouldn't have to admit they were wrong. A former U.S. senator went live on a podcast. I'm not saying she didn't do a brave thing, he said, his tone polished and patronizing. But if we start allowing non-relatives to override medical governance just because they feel emotionally connected, we're opening the door to chaos. Structure exists for a reason. The host nodded along. Would this have happened? The senator added, if she were a white nanny? Silence. Then the host laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. Meanwhile, back in Casablanca, Emily clung to Amara like a second heartbeat. She refused to sleep unless her hand touched Amara's. She refused to eat unless Amara was awake. Every day, she asked if she could give Amara her own liver back. She gave me magic, she told a nurse. I want to give it back so she feels good too. A week into the media firestorm, the American consular agents returned again, this time with reporters stationed outside the building. They requested a private interview with Amara. Richard stood in the hallway, blocking the door. She just survived a liver surgery and a coma, he said. She's not talking to anyone. She'll have to eventually, the taller agent replied. We're treating this as a potential international abduction case. Richard's jaw tightened. You're trying to make her a criminal for saving a child. She removed a minor from U.S. medical care without parental authorization. That's legally questionable. I am the parent, and I gave her my child's life to carry when no one else would. The agent didn't flinch. You didn't authorize the travel. I didn't need to, Richard snapped. Because the woman you're targeting? She's more of a mother to Emily than any system has ever been. That night, Amara sat in a wheelchair beside the window. She looked down at the street below, flashes of cameras, people chanting. Some signs said, Amara is love. Others said, don't reward illegality. She shook her head slowly. They don't even see her, she whispered. Who? Richard asked. Emily. They see her, he said. No, Amara replied. They see a billionaire's daughter. They see a headline. They don't see the girl who cried every night for her mother and never stopped calling me mommy number 2. He said nothing. She turned to him. If they come for me, don't let them take that from her. The next day, a video went viral. It wasn't filmed by a reporter. It was posted by a Moroccan nurse. A simple, unedited clip. Emily, seated beside Amara's bed, brushing her hair with a toy comb. You look so pretty now, Emily whispered. You're gonna get up soon, and we'll have cake again. The clip ended there. But within 12 hours, it had 6.7 million views. And the tide began to shift. A civil rights group issued a statement. We stand behind Amara Williams. No law should criminalize compassion, especially when racism tried to block it first. Medical journals published op-eds. This isn't a case of law breaking. It's a case study in system failure. Activists flooded Horizon Children's inbox with petitions. Public support surged. But behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Because for every voice that praised Amara, there were those who saw her courage as defiance, uncomfortable, uncontrollable, and dangerous. In a Washington boardroom, 3 men in suits sat quietly, watching the coverage. "She's becoming a problem," one said. "Can't silence her," said another. "We don't need to," the third replied. "We just need to shift the narrative, make her harder to trust." "How?" "Question her motives, leak her financials, dig into her past." The first man raised a brow. "She's a nanny, and no one stays that clean forever." In 48 hours, a scandal would surface, one that had nothing to do with the surgery, but everything to do with destroying Amara's credibility before she could speak her truth. The first letter came folded in a child's drawing, crayon hearts, crooked stars, and a stick figure family holding hands. Inside, "Thank you for being brave. My brother had cancer too. I hope you feel better soon." It was signed, simply, Amira, age 7. The next arrived by courier, $1,000 in cash, wrapped in an envelope marked, "For Amara. Use it for whatever brings you joy. You earned more than applause." Then came the darker ones. "You had no right. People like you shouldn't be making medical decisions. You exploited that little girl for attention." The threats didn't arrive in crayon. They came typed, sharp, anonymous. They didn't question the surgery. They questioned who had performed it. Amara lay in bed, propped up by pillows, her strength inching back each day. Her stitches ached, her muscles tensed, but none of that compared to the emotional weight sitting on her chest. Richard filtered the letters, shielding Emily from the vitriol, but he couldn't shield Amara from the headlines. Unlicensed hero or reckless imposter. Should nannies be allowed to override parental boundaries? Race, risk, and the line between love and law. The same nation that had once ignored her was now obsessed with deciding what she was, savior or criminal. Even her recovery was politicized. On the 7th day after the transplant, Horizon Children's Hospital issued a formal statement. "We acknowledge the survival of patient Emily Monroe. However, we do not condone the method by which the surgery was performed. The procedure circumvented appropriate medical protocol and could set a dangerous precedent for unregulated organ donations." Amara read the statement in full. Then read it again. Nowhere did it say "thank you." Nowhere did it mention the phrase "she saved a life." It said precedent. It said dangerous. It said everything about systems and nothing about love. News shows trotted out legal experts with quick sound bites. A Harvard-trained ethicist on MSNBC declared, "This was an act of emotional extremism. It challenges everything about medical consent." A former federal prosecutor countered, "If she were a white godmother, we'd be calling this a fairy tale." On Fox News, a blonde anchor asked with barely concealed suspicion, "Do we know her background? Was there any financial incentive?" They dissected her choice without ever understanding her cost. They questioned her motives, while ignoring the centuries of institutional mistrust she'd been forced to breathe like air. Amara said nothing publicly. She deleted her social media accounts, turned off the news, but even in silence, the world kept coming for her. A Homeland Security letter arrived, addressed to Richard, requesting a formal interview to determine cross-border medical violations involving a minor. The Moroccan hospital launched a panel inquiry not to reprimand Dr. Salim, but to cover themselves from U.S. pressure. A nursing magazine wanted to do a photo shoot. A political campaign asked her to speak at their rally. She said no to everything. She hadn't done this for recognition. She'd done it for Emily. In the middle of all this, a nurse knocked gently on Amara's door one afternoon. "I think you should see this," she said, handing her a manila folder. Inside were over 200 pages of messages compiled by hospital volunteers. People from South Africa, Brazil, Syria, Chicago, Tokyo. Messages from nurses who had lost patients because rules delayed action. From mothers who'd buried children because the right donor didn't qualify. From daughters who'd been raised by women like Amara, who never got thanked, let alone heard. She sat for hours reading them, her throat dry, her eyes full. For the first time in days, her hands stopped trembling. But outside the hospital gates, the line between admiration and control was blurring fast. Richard did a rare televised interview with a journalist from The Atlantic. "She saved my daughter," he said, his voice calm but intense. "Every system failed Emily, except Amara. She's not a risk. She's the reason my daughter is alive." The interview went viral. But it also painted a target. Because the very next morning, a woman appeared in the hospital lobby. Blonde, blazer, leather case tucked under her arm. She didn't ask for Richard. She didn't speak to Salim. She asked for Amara directly, by name. A nurse escorted her upstairs hesitantly. When she reached room 206, Richard was already there, seated beside Amara with a tray of fruit and Emily's latest drawing. "Can I help you?" he asked sharply. The woman smiled without warmth. "My name is Valerie Locke. I represent the Monroe Estates Contingency Legal Counsel." Richard stood slowly. "That counsel was never activated." "It has been now," she replied, handing over a folded document. "A third party has filed a formal petition regarding the custody and medical decision-making for Emily Monroe." Amara's breath caught. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means someone believes your actions, however well-intentioned, have blurred the lines of authority. There are legal grounds to challenge who gets to be considered a parent here." Richard snapped. "This is absurd." Valerie turned to Amara. "They're not challenging him," she said. "They're challenging you." Amara felt the room sway. "They can't take her from me," she whispered. "No one's taking her," Richard said firmly. But Valerie didn't move. "Family law is complicated," she said. "And there are people who believe that if this act was done without legal status, it could be interpreted as endangerment, especially when it involves international travel." Amara stared at her, then at the document. There, in black ink, was a name she hadn't heard in years. Patricia L. Monroe, Richard's estranged mother. The woman who hadn't spoken to him since Julia's funeral. She had filed for emergency custodial review. And with one signature, Amara's miracle was now being redefined as a crime against the family she nearly died to save. The document sat on the table between them like a wound no one could stop bleeding. Richard read the name again, Patricia L. Monroe, and felt years of silence catch fire in his throat. His mother had vanished from his life after Julia's funeral. She hadn't called when Emily was born, hadn't visited once during her illness. And now, after everything Amara had done, she'd reappeared. Not to help, not to heal, but to take. "She's filing for custodial review?" Amara asked, her voice low and careful. Richard nodded, the veins in his temple pulsing. "She's claiming that your actions demonstrate reckless disregard for legal guardianship structures, and that the court must intervene to ensure Emily's welfare remains in appropriate hands." Amara stared at him. "But I saved her. I know that. I gave her part of my body. I know that. Then why does the law care what I'm called?" Richard's voice cracked. "Because it was never written for people like you." That evening, the hospital's legal counsel arrived unannounced, flanked by a representative from the Moroccan Ministry of Health. They didn't speak to Emily. They didn't ask Amara how she felt. They didn't ask about her recovery. They just wanted paperwork. Consents, flight logs, Amara's visa. They wanted to quantify her love. And when it didn't fit neatly into a statute, they wrote her down as unauthorized caregiver. The term made Richard physically sick. That night, he stood before a row of microphones outside the hospital and addressed the world. "My name is Richard Monroe. I'm Emily's father. And this woman, Amara Williams, is her family." He paused. "When my wife died, Amara raised our daughter. She fed her, protected her, loved her. And when I couldn't save Emily with all the money in the world, Amara gave her part of herself without hesitation. She risked her life. She defied broken rules. And she succeeded where every institution failed." He looked directly into the cameras. "Call her what you want. The law might call her non-relative. But to Emily, and to me, she's the mother who stayed." The press conference went viral within minutes. But this time, the story didn't splinter. It surged. The hashtags returned louder. Number family by choice. Number mommy number 2 is real. Number let Amara be family. Within 24 hours, petitions flooded the Monroe Foundation website, demanding legislative change. 1,000 testimonies poured in nannies, step-parents, adoptive guardians, begging for policy reform that acknowledged love over lineage. Even former hospital staff began to speak out. One nurse tweeted anonymously, "I saw her every night beside that child. She was the mother. We were just wearing badges." Meanwhile, Amara sat in a plain hospital robe, watching the footage of Richard's speech with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply stared, then whispered, "Why now?" Emily sat beside her, coloring quietly. When the speech ended, she looked up and said, "He told the truth." Amara brushed a curl behind the child's ear. "The truth was always here," she said. It just took pain to make them listen. The legal challenge continued. But public opinion was tipping fast. Celebrities posted tributes. Churches held prayer circles. A group of pediatric nurses published an open letter. Let this woman rest. She carried a child across borders when our system wouldn't move an inch. Even conservative pundits began softening their tone, not because they understood, but because the optics had shifted. Amara became the face of a new kind of family, the kind the law didn't know how to process. Days later, Richard filed official amendments to his estate. He changed his will, granted Amara full emergency medical rights over Emily, named her as joint guardian in the event of his death. He sent a copy of the new documentation to Patricia Monroe's lawyer. The silence that followed was thunderous. Hospital policy shifted next. Casablanca's transplant wing updated their intake protocol. Family is defined not only by legal title, but by demonstrable care over time. And, then, something extraordinary happened. 3 families across 3 continents came forward with similar stories, non-blood caregivers who had tried to save loved ones but were blocked by legal red tape. They demanded change. The story had started with Amara, but now it was a movement. Journalists begged for an exclusive. Documentarians pitched 3-part series. Publishers offered book deals. Daytime hosts requested sit-down interviews. Even Netflix reached out through a backdoor connection. Amara said no to all of them. I'm not your story, she told a journalist who snuck into the hospital lobby. I'm a person. I bled. I hurt. I'm healing. And I don't want to sell my scars. Richard offered to handle media relations for her. She declined gently. You already fought your war, she said. Now let me decide how I'll fight mine. One afternoon, Amara stepped out into the hospital garden for the first time since the surgery. The sun was warm on her skin. Her gait was slow, but steady. Emily walked beside her, holding her hand tightly. A nurse handed her a phone. It's CNN, she whispered. They want you live tonight. Amara looked at her, then at the flowers blooming nearby, then back at Emily. She shook her head. I already spoke, she said. When I laid on that table. The nurse nodded, silently awed. Back in the room, Richard found a stack of offers piled on the desk, legal endorsements, speaking invitations, scholarships. He turned to Amara. You sure about this? Yes. They want to make you a symbol. I don't need to be one. They want you to be the new face of reform. I'd rather be the old face of home. He paused. Then what do you want? She looked at him, and then at Emily, who was humming to herself with a crayon in her hand. I want to live, she said. Not for cameras, not for hashtags, for her. But just as she began to rebuild her private world, a letter arrived bearing a gold seal, a federal signature, and 4 words that could unravel everything again. Grand jury hearing scheduled. The invitation arrived in a velvet box, gold embossed, heavy as regret. It came from the Global Humanity Summit in Geneva, a black-tie gala known for honoring world leaders, Nobel laureates, and the occasional Hollywood savior. The note inside was formal, sterile, and bursting with the kind of reverence that made Amara Williams deeply uncomfortable. You have been selected as our international recipient of the Courage Through Compassion Award. All travel, accommodations, and security provided. A standing ovation awaits. Amara closed the box, slid it back onto the coffee table, and said nothing. Richard glanced at her from across the room. That's the 3rd one this week. I know. You're not going? She shook her head. I'm not interested in applause. The world didn't know what to do with a woman who saved a life, and then refused the spotlight. Award shows called, wanting her in gowns, under lights, thanking committees. She declined them all. Talk shows offered her 6-figure appearance fees. Producers sent sample questions and pre-written talking points. She declined those too. Universities offered honorary degrees in medical ethics and humanitarian law. One suggested she deliver remarks on motherhood as activism. She declined them with a simple sentence. I didn't save a billionaire's daughter. I saved my daughter. Her words were repeated across news tickers for days. Some saw defiance. Others saw dignity. But all agreed Amara Williams had done something the world wasn't used to. She'd turned down glory, and in doing so, became even more powerful. At home, things moved slower. Emily had recovered more fully than doctors predicted. Her hair was growing back, her appetite restored. She played with dolls again. She laughed without flinching. Every week, she asked Amara if they could finally go to the park. Amara always said yes, and then found a reason to wait just one more day. Maybe tomorrow, she'd think. Maybe when the media finally moves on. But the media never really moved on. Paparazzi hid in bushes. Drone cameras hovered over their mailbox. One morning, Amara opened the front door to find a glass award left at her feet. No note attached. Just her name, etched beneath the words, "Modern Motherhood." Richard hired private security. Emily asked if the men outside were bodyguards or babysitters. Amara replied, "Maybe a little of both." The letter from the federal grand jury had come and gone. Richard had testified, calm and unflinching. Medical experts supported Amara's choices. Public pressure crushed any notion of indictment. The case quietly dissolved. But something in Amara stayed cautious. Even after she won, even after the headlines faded, she didn't celebrate. She just kept Emily close and let the rest of the world talk without her. One day, a publisher sent her a check with no contract attached. Just a post-it note. "We'll print whatever you want. Your story, your silence, your truth." She sent it back, uncashed. What she'd lived wasn't a manuscript. It was a prayer. And prayers didn't need binding. A year passed. Seasons turned. And life began to reassemble itself. Amara cooked dinner every night. Richard stopped traveling for work. Emily started asking questions about Julia, her mother by blood, and Amara answered every one with gentleness, never erasing, never comparing. "I came second," she told Emily once. "But I stayed." Richard updated his living trust again. He gave Amara full legal guardianship. Not as a backup, as an equal. "I should have done this years ago," he said. "You weren't ready to see me yet," she replied. He nodded. "But I see you now." Then came the day exactly 1 year since the surgery, when something changed again. It was late afternoon. Emily was in the backyard, drawing butterflies in chalk. Richard was on a call upstairs. Amara was folding laundry when the knock came. She opened the door slowly, expecting a delivery. But it wasn't FedEx. It wasn't media. It was a woman in her early 50s, with locks twisted neatly to her shoulders and a briefcase in her hand. "Miss Williams?" the woman asked. "Yes? My name is Daria Fields. I'm with the U.S. Department of Education." Amara stiffened. "We're not taking interviews." "This isn't that," Daria said calmly. "This is something else." She handed Amara a sealed folder. Inside, a formal offer. Emily Monroe had been selected for a privately funded International Educational Fellowship, full academic scholarship, K-12, multilingual immersion, world-class tutors, travel included, enrollment by invitation only. Amara's hands gripped the paper. "You're offering this to Emily?" "Yes," Daria replied. Amara read the fine print, then looked up. "And why wasn't I told about this sooner?" "You were intentionally not contacted," Daria admitted. "The sponsor of the program requested all correspondence go through Richard Monroe." He declined. Amara frowned. "So why are you here?" "Because the sponsor has appealed directly." "Who?" Daria hesitated, then said the name, Patricia Monroe, Richard's estranged mother. And with a single invitation cloaked as generosity, Emily's future was no longer just a miracle, it was a battleground all over again. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Inside, the logo was etched in gold foil. Maison d'Étoile, Global School for Gifted Youth. It was the kind of institution most people only read about in magazines. Elite, exclusive, tuition that rivaled private jets. It had campuses in Paris, Singapore, Zurich. Students wore navy blazers with brass buttons. They took fencing before lunch, robotics before dinner, and they wanted Emily Monroe, in honor of the heroic act that saved her life. The letter read, "We are proud to offer a full academic scholarship. Our board believes children raised by extraordinary people become extraordinary leaders." There were brochures inside, photos of glass walls, treehouse libraries, a 24-hour planetarium. It looked like something out of a dream, but when Amara finished reading, she quietly placed the envelope in a drawer and didn't say a word. Richard found it a few days later, while looking for stamps. His face tensed. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" he asked. Amara didn't look up from the sink. "Because we're not sending her. It's a full ride. Ivy League pipeline. It's a pipeline we didn't ask for." He paused. "Are you angry because of who sent it?" She turned. "No. I'm tired of the world trying to adopt her." Richard folded the letter. "They're not trying to take her away. Aren't they?" He exhaled. "She's already been made a symbol. I'm not letting her become a product too." When they told Emily she wasn't going to the fancy school with the space dome and the unicorn science lab, She looked up from her cereal and said, "Okay." Just like that. No tears, no pleading, just one small nod. And then, "Do I still get to go to the library here?" "Yes, baby," Amara said, kissing the top of her head. "Every Friday." Emily smiled. "Then I'm good." She stayed in her neighborhood school. Small class sizes, old chalkboards, a playground with 2 broken swings. But Amara walked her there every day, hand in hand. And when they reached the school gate, Amara would kneel and say the same thing. "Be kind. Be curious. And remember who you are." And Emily would repeat it back. Kind. Curious. Me. Some kids knew her from the headlines, some didn't. One boy asked her once, "Are you the girl who almost died?" Emily had replied, "I'm the girl who's still here." Another girl whispered behind her, "She's the liver girl." Emily didn't answer. She just went back to coloring. Her favorite thing to draw lately was hearts, big ones, small ones, tangled together. She always used red and gold. Amara never asked why. She already knew. Meanwhile, Richard turned down 3 more offers, one from a senator's office, one from a tech think tank, and one from a luxury magazine that wanted to do a day-in-the-life piece featuring Emily and her brave nanny. "I'm her mother," Amara corrected gently. Every time. And every time, the person on the phone would pause. Then say, "Of course. Sorry. Just protocol." One night, Emily crawled into Amara's lap and asked, "Why don't we live in a big house like on TV?" Amara stroked her hair. "Because we don't need a big house. We need a big heart." Emily thought for a second. "Like yours?" "No, baby. Like ours." On the morning of Emily's 7th birthday, Amara made banana pancakes. Richard decorated the backyard with pink balloons. Emily's classmates trickled in, dropping gift bags and handmade cards. There were no news cameras, no speeches, no gala invitations. Just music, laughter, melted ice cream, and a chocolate cake with a single word on top, "Alive." Later that afternoon, after most of the guests had left, and the sun began to soften, Emily sat on the porch steps in her party dress, her legs swinging back and forth. Amara came and sat beside her, tired but glowing. "Did you have a good birthday?" she asked. Emily nodded. "Best one ever." They sat in silence for a minute. Then Emily asked, softly, "Why didn't my real mommy come back?" Amara's heart stopped mid-beat. The backyard faded. The balloons blurred. She turned slowly. "Baby, what do you mean?" Emily didn't look at her. She stared at the grass. "I mean, Mommy Julia. Why didn't she come back to see me now that I'm okay?" Amara's hands stilled. She'd prepared for this moment. She hadn't expected it to hurt this much. Richard stood at the kitchen window, watching. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw Emily's shoulders curl, saw Amara pull her close, saw the silence bloom between them. He stepped outside. Amara looked up at him, eyes glossy but unbroken. She nodded once. He came and sat on Emily's other side. And for the first time, the 3 of them were still. Not chasing a future. Not running from the past. Just still. Emily looked at them both, then asked another question. Softly, carefully, almost too quiet to hear. "Am I allowed to have 2 mommies?" And in the quiet that followed, Amara realized this wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about finally defining what family meant and who got to say it out loud. The house was quiet except for the sound of balloons rubbing against the ceiling. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the curls in Emily's hair as she spun in her birthday dress, a soft yellow cotton gown with tiny pearls stitched at the collar. No monitors. No IV lines. No hospital bed in the corner. Just a kitchen full of laughter, a table full of cake, and a backyard filled with chalk drawings and handmade party hats. She was 7 now, alive, and she danced like her body remembered none of the pain it had endured. Amara leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching her. Her body still carried echoes of the surgery, occasional stiffness, an ache on cold mornings, but none of it mattered now. This was what she'd fought for. Not the applause, not the press, just this. A little girl, barefoot in her own yard, knowing joy like it was normal. Richard stood beside her, 2 paper plates in his hand. She asked for second cake. Amara smiled. "Let her have it. It's her life now." He nodded and walked toward the table, pausing to brush a fly off the frosting. There was no camera crew, no speeches, no trending hashtag. Just a birthday party the way kids were supposed to have them. In the living room, above the fireplace, hung a frame. Inside it, slightly faded but still legible, was the letter Amara had written the night she fled the hospital with Emily in her arms. "If I don't wake up, tell her Mommy said yes." Richard had found it after the surgery and asked quietly if he could frame it. Amara agreed, with one condition: that it stay in their home, not in a museum, not in a documentary, not on some stage. Just here, where it belonged, where Emily could walk by it every day and know, you were chosen, fought for, held, loved. Later that evening, after the last child was picked up and the music had stopped playing, Emily sat on the couch with frosting on her fingers and confetti tangled in her hair. Amara knelt beside her, wiping cake crumbs off her chin. Emily looked up, her face serious now. "Mommy number two?" "Yes, baby. Now I'm really going to live, right?" Amara paused. Her heart ached in the most beautiful way. She touched Emily's cheek. "Yes, my love. You are going to live." Emily nodded once, slowly. Then whispered, "Okay. Then I want to be a doctor when I grow up." Amara smiled, her eyes wet. "Why a doctor?" "So I can help people like you did, but I won't wait for permission." That night, Amara folded away the last party napkin and found herself standing in front of the framed letter. She touched the glass, running her fingers over the words like they were still warm. It had been a promise, a gamble, a prayer, and now, somehow, it was a story, one that lived inside her child. But just as she turned to head upstairs, there was a knock at the door. Not a light knock, a purposeful one. She froze. Richard looked up from the sink. "You expecting someone?" She shook her head. They both approached. He opened the door. A man stood there, late 30s, sharp eyes, a messenger bag slung over one shoulder and a camera slung over the other. "Good evening," he said, smiling gently. "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. My name is Caleb Shaw. I'm a producer with Black Archive Media. We document real stories that never got the justice they deserved." Amara's body stiffened. Richard stepped slightly in front of her. "We're not doing press," he said curtly. "I understand," Caleb said quickly. "This isn't a network special. I'm not here to make you a spectacle. I'm here because your story changed things. And the world only knows half of it." Amara narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean?" Caleb reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a screenshot, a policy memo, from Horizon Children's Medical Center. It was dated 2 weeks after Emily's surgery. The memo was internal, never released publicly. It outlined a patient denial protocol tied to non-familial donors and included a private clause labeled, "Ethics Override Restrictions for Non-White Caregivers." Amara's breath caught. Richard stepped forward, took the page, read it once and clenched his fist. "This says, this wasn't just about rules." Caleb nodded slowly. "They blocked you, Amara. Not just because you weren't family, but because of who you are. We have whistleblower testimony, staff emails, internal reviews." He looked at her with gentle urgency. "We believe your story wasn't just courageous. It was suppressed. And we want to document that truth before someone else rewrites it." Amara stepped outside, slowly, into the night air. She closed the door behind her. Caleb followed. She didn't speak right away, then said, quietly, "You want me to reopen a wound, after I just finished healing. I want you to own the full truth before someone else tells a lie loud enough to erase it." She looked up at the stars. For a moment, she remembered the feel of Emily's hand in hers in the back seat of that car, racing to JFK. The tremble, the heat, the certainty. She had risked everything, and she had survived. But had the system? Back inside, Emily was asleep on the couch, one arm draped over her party dress, her face calm, her chest rising steady. Amara walked back in, knelt beside her, and kissed her forehead. Richard looked at her. "What did he say?" She handed him the folder. He read the first few lines. His eyes turned stormy. "So what do we do?" Amara didn't answer at first. Then she looked at him, and then at Emily. "We tell it, but not for us." Richard nodded. "For her." Amara turned toward the stairs, her voice quiet. "For everyone who still gets called, just the help." But what Amara didn't know was that someone else had already started filming, and their version of the story wasn't one she'd recognize at all. It began with the letter. No narration, no slow-motion B-roll, no somber music score. Just a blank screen, then Amara's handwriting, scanned and set against soft ambient silence. "If I don't wake up, tell her." Mommy said yes. The opening frame of the documentary was 5 seconds long. but it made millions of people cry in the first minute. The film, titled More Than Blood, was released independently, just 3 months after Caleb Shaw knocked on Amara's door. He kept his promise. No reenactments, no paparazzi stills, no dramatic court montages. Amara's face wasn't shown, her voice wasn't heard. She never appeared once on camera, and yet her presence wrapped around every second like breath. Instead, the film centered on the journey of a single document, Amara's letter, how it was written, what it meant, what it risked, and what it changed. It featured whistleblowers from Horizon Children's, transplant surgeons, ethics experts, a school teacher from Milwaukee who cried while reading the letter aloud in a staff meeting, a mother in Atlanta who paused the film 3 times just to hold her son a little tighter. It took 3 days for the documentary to hit 1 million views. It took less than 10 for it to break 20 million. By week 2, a national pediatric health conference in Baltimore dedicated and dusted the entire session to what they called the Amara dilemma. A headline from The Atlantic read, "When law says no but love says yes." The New York Times published an op-ed titled, "We called her the help, she called herself a mother." But what caught fire faster than the film was the phrase at its core, love beyond blood. A teacher in Sacramento painted it on her classroom wall. A protester in Detroit carried it on a sign outside a hospital under investigation. A NICU nurse in Louisiana tattooed it on her wrist. It wasn't just a motto. It became a movement. Hospitals began to buckle under pressure. The board at Horizon Children's, after 2 weeks of silence, issued a public apology. Not for the surgery, not for denying Amara, but for the policy that allowed it to happen. In a statement, they admitted long-standing systemic flaws in caregiver recognition, especially for non-biological, often racially marginalized individuals. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Within 3 months, donor eligibility laws in California, Illinois, and Maryland were revised. Non-blood caregivers were now allowed to petition for live donor evaluation in emergencies. Emily Monroe's survival became the turning point in a national debate about who gets to save a life and who is simply told to wait in the hallway. Still, Amara didn't say a word. She didn't post about the documentary, didn't take interviews. She sat on the porch most evenings, watching Emily play chalk games on the sidewalk. Sometimes Richard joined them. Sometimes he just watched her from the kitchen window, a quiet ache in his chest every time she smiled. He knew she was changing the world, and still didn't want credit for it. Caleb sent her a message the night the film hit 50 million streams. "They're calling this the most human story of the decade. You okay?" Amara replied, "They don't know me, but I'm glad they know what I wrote." A week later, a mother from Phoenix posted a TikTok of her daughter dancing in a hospital room after a successful kidney transplant. The caption read, "Her godmother wasn't blood, but she was our match. Number love beyond blood." It went viral in hours. In Chicago, a panel of lawmakers played Amara's letter aloud during a hearing. One senator, black, in her 60s, raised by an aunt who was never technically legal guardian, choked up while reading the final line. "Tell her," Mommy said, "yes." The bill passed 32-3. Amara kept every newspaper clipping in a shoebox under her bed. She never reread them, but she kept them anyway, because they were proof not of her story but of what love could ignite when it wasn't interrupted by permission slips and bureaucracy. And then came the final scene, the closing image of the film. No fanfare, no music, just a handheld camera, slightly shaky, capturing a quiet moment at dusk. Emily Monroe, age 7, sitting cross-legged on her living room rug. She holds the original letter in her hands, aged, crinkled, sacred. She looks into the camera, eyes steady, voice soft. She said yes. Cut to black. The moment shattered the internet. It was raw, pure, undeniable. A child holding proof that love had done something the system couldn't. The clip was turned into GIFs, reaction videos, classroom assignments. One college professor in North Carolina played it before every lecture on ethics. A Harvard med student carried it in her wallet. And across the world, foster parents, adoptive uncles, chosen families, and kinship caregivers finally had a phrase that reflected the reality they'd always lived. Love beyond blood. One morning, as Amara poured orange juice into a glass, Emily sat at the table and said, "I think a lot of people know us now." Amara raised an eyebrow. "You think so? I saw someone draw your letter on the sidewalk at school." Amara smiled. "Well, I'm glad it meant something to them." Emily nodded. Do you think one day they'll stop saying you're not my real mom? Amara walked over, knelt beside